You're listening to DruidCast, episode 189.
You were raised in a forest, it grew straight and tall. As you weaved through the trunks, you felt desperately small. The taller you grew, the taller the trees, and you'd run home all muddy and graze both your knees. And there in the middle stood a tall, slender beech. If you raised both your arms, you found you could reach the base of her branches, and upwards you swung. The forest, she whispered as all her leaves sang to you. In those indigo eyes there's a child that hides, and the stars they call out to their runaway bride. Oh, come home now, darling, the journey's done. Your troubles are old for a body so young. You are the first and the last to climb up the tree. You slept in her branches, you whispered that she had been there from the first. She'd be there till the end, and you'd weave her your stories of myths and pretend. And there in the night came a mighty great storm. Her arms were outstretched as her body was torn. You cried when you found her, and after you fled, but nothing could silence the voice in your head. Breath cloud on a window, a shadow on the lawn, or a leaf on the breeze, and a star in the dawn. Oh, come home now, darling, the journey's done. Your troubles are old for a body so young. Life's over, they'll herald you home.
Hello my friends, and welcome to DruidCast episode 189. I am your host Dave the Bard, and DruidCast is brought to you on or around the 20th of the month by the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. If you want to find out more about the Order and our courses, you can do that on our website, which is at www.druidry.org. You probably don't need the www bit anymore, do you? I'm probably showing my age there. It's probably just druidry.org now anyway. But welcome everybody. What an opening to the show. That was Catherine Priddy with her song Indigo from the album The Eternal Rocks Beneath. I was sent that by Harriet, a member of the Order and listener to the podcast, and she'd already sought Catherine out and got permission for us to play that song on the show. Now, I've never heard any of Catherine's music before, and when I pressed play for the first time and those opening chords began, followed by such a beautiful voice, well, no lie, my friends, I had tears listening to that one. An incredible experience when a song reaches almost directly into your heart. So thank you, Harriet, and thank you, Catherine, for writing such a beautiful song and allowing me to play it on our show. To all of our listeners, I hope you all seek out the album and this has brought you many new fans. The talky bit this month is an interview with poet, writer and honorary bard of the Order, Mr. Barry Patterson. Now, if you're a long-time listener to the show, you will have heard Barry's performances from the early recordings from our summer-winter gathering, Eisteddfod. Always a live favourite, so I thought I'd get him on the show for a chat about his writing and spiritual path. It's a long interview, but everything in it is gold. So grab that cuppa and enjoy the interview with Barry Patterson.
The Talky Bit.
Well, I am sitting here on Zoom and I can see my friend Barry Patterson, but you can't because you will only hear this audio. We have known each other. I dread to think how many decades we've known each other, but we've not actually had a chance to sit down and have a good old chat. And I haven't had the chance to really get to know you and what brought you to the path and your journey. So really, Barry, maybe we can start there. You know, what was your journey? And let me just tell, first off, let me say that to me, you are a poet, you are a writer, an observer, an entertainer, a person who has an amazing connection to the land. And that's what I would like to touch on as we go through this interview. But right at the very beginning, how did you find that connection and what brought you to Druidry and the Obod in the first place?
Well, Dave, thanks. I'm honoured to be here with you and have this lovely chat. I suppose really I should go right back to the 1950s. My mum and dad met youth hosteling.
All right.
All these young people from the towns and cities in the north would go youth hosteling at weekends and they'd have a great time. And then when I was about 5, my dad decided he was going to take me back to the youth hostel they used to frequent and the wild lands of Northumberland. Rocky shores, hills, secret valleys, loads of prehistoric sites, wildlife. My dad wasn't particularly into all that stuff. But the warden of the youth hostel was an old family friend, and he was. And so from a very early age, I was already keen on natural history as a small child, but I was introduced really, to the land by good people. Mm. And we'd be on top of some hill in Northumberland with prehistoric cup and ring markings carved into the stones. And the adults that I was with would fall quiet for a little while. And little Barry would be crawling around all over the place, poking his nose into things. Mm. And so, from a very young age, I was really, that was it. As far as I was concerned, that was my kind of, where my heart was in that land, in that lovely wild land, basically.
Yeah, it is a beautiful place.
Sorry.
It's a beautiful area of the land. I've barely gone to Northumberland. I think I've only ever gone to Lindisfarne, actually, over onto the island and that kind of area, but not really explored it. But it has a wild feel about it, doesn't it?
The coast south from Lindisfarne, for 10 to 20 miles south of Lindisfarne, is just truly remarkable, very complex geologically, thick with wildlife, particularly with winter visiting birds, and it's a magical place. But anyway, so I grew up with that natural history and a sense of being spiritual but not religious. And as a young man, I was a science boy, but I knew there was more to the world than the naive materialists can see. And so I started to experiment with things which scientists wouldn't usually experiment with, scared myself witless with ritual magic, and then took to Buddhist meditation because it was a simple and had obvious benefits and wasn't as scary as you know what. And then I did that for a very long. I've practiced my whole life. I practiced sitting meditation since I was about 15. And then in my 20s, as a result of various experiences and adventures around and about the place, I made contact with the then emergent modern pagan revival. Shan of House of the Goddess was my teacher.
Oh, right.
A good teacher she was. She taught us ritual mechanics. She taught us, like how you build ritual, how you make ritual work, that kind of stuff. And she taught she was a very good teacher. She taught a lot of really good stuff. And I got a great grounding. And soon decided, that I was a kind of more on the shamanic side of the spectrum with respect to my paganism. Mm-hmm. And then also constantly worked to try and integrate that with my, Buddhist worldview. That, which put in Barry's terms is, if you're wrong about the nature of the self, and you're wrong about the nature of reality, you're wrong about everything. And if you're wrong about everything, you're screwed. It's not that you need necessarily to find the truth, but rather that one should maintain an open and inquiring mind with respect to one's own deepest nature, and with respect to the nature of the world. And then as a result of that work, I spent a lot of time outdoors in South London, in fact, and in North Kent, in the wild woods by the Kent megaliths, with a bunch of like-minded people. And from that grew my little pamphlet, The Art of Conversation with the Genius Loki. And then that work, I dined out on that work for years because I wanted to write in simple terms things that a lot of the pagan folk I knew didn't know or hadn't occurred to them. Like, you don't just walk into some potentially powerful place, a total stranger, set up and start doing heavy stuff. You've got to get to know the spirit of the place. Mm-hmm. And there are lots of ways of doing that. And so I wrote my little pamphlet. And then at that time, Pagan Link invented the pub moot.
Right.
Pagan Link held camps in which we would all gather from all around the country. We'd all go and we'd gather somewhere and sit around the campfire arguing about what paganism was. Pagan Link put an awful lot of people in touch with each other, and it also created just a kind of grassroots network of people. And so you could find the people you shared interests with, and you could find like-minded people. Mm. And I became friends with Penny and Arthur Billington. And years later, Penny and Arthur, it must have been around about the year 2000, 2001. Penny and Arthur invited me to a Gorseth of Obod in Leicestershire, which was at autumn equinox.
I remember it.
Anne and I were running Coventry Earth Spirit at the time, but we were getting really bored with running Coventry Earth Spirit. And so we said to them, we're not your mum and dad. And we've never, ever told you we were a high priest and a high priestess. If you're a group, be a group. Bye. Mm-hmm. And we were a little bit bored and a little bit jaded with the general pagan world. And then we came to this Gorseth with Penny and Arthur. And what a remarkable weekend. What an incredible group of people. It's just like that thing that you get in Obod, and in other places too, where, you walk in and it's just like you always were there and you always knew these people, like you're all old friends. It really felt like that. The warmth and the welcome. And then we had a great weekend together, did lots of things. And then the climax of the weekend was an autumn equinox ceremony. And it was in a yew grove on the grounds of the place where we were staying. And it was just one of the most remarkable ceremonies of my entire life. It was just so beautiful and powerful. But we didn't do a lot of that stuff that the more Wiccan-oriented ritualists will do. The kind of, we have to raise energy, we have to raise energy, we have to raise... No, there was nothing like that. It came up out the ground and it came out of our hearts. And by the end of that ceremony, there wasn't a dry eye in the circle. We were crying with joy and beauty. And Anne and I went home and said, God blimey, is that what the Druids do? Following year, I was invited to go to what was then Obod camps. You know?
Yeah.
And we walked into Obod camps. Were met by a whole lot of people we had met on our previous thing, plus one or two other old friends. And then camp was just like, wow, camp was great. We walked through the camp when we first arrived and saw that, you know, water world with the water tower and the caravan and the sinks and taps and benders and yurts and I said to Anne, God blimey, you know, the Druids are pagan engineers. And that was so inspiring. We just said, after we'd been to a couple of Obod camps, as they were then, we just said, whatever these guys are doing, you know, it's pretty good. So we joined the order.
Right, that was that.
But I would say that I'm a perpetual bard. And I think it's a little unfair that maybe some people get the impression that being a bard is like entry-level druidry.
Oh, I agree.
You know,
it's not at all. It's the foundation of everything. That's why it's first. You know what I mean? To me, that's what it is. Yeah. You know. Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, you know, so I kind of, you know, and then arriving in Obod, discovered, you know, with my interest in the Dharma, in Buddha's Dharma, and a long-time practitioner, discovered that what's really interesting is that Druidry seems to be a place where pagans with an interest in Buddhism tend to be.
Mm-hmm.
So there are quite a lot of people with an interest in the Dharma who are members of Obod.
Yeah, yeah.
With my particular
those campfires from the Obod camps of the 2000s just were so magical. You know, with Ivan and with Julie and the labyrinths of fire and the talks and the community. They were very, very special times, without a doubt. And I think they if you look at the Obod Eisteddfod at the still at the summer and winter gatherings, the bards who are performing there, they learnt their craft, or they honed a lot of their craft around those campfires in Obod camps, you know, me included, you know, Jim Fapel, everybody, just amazing. Yeah, yeah. Well, that was a journey.
Well, that's the journey. Anyway.
That's the journey. Yeah, yeah. And so when did you sort of start writing your poetry and learning your instruments and that kind of thing? Was that before you came into the order, or was it afterwards?
Yeah, a long time.
It has, okay.
So then at school, I was pretty good at creative writing. I won 1 or 2 little prizes within and outside the school for creative writing. As a teenager, I wrote poetry and never stopped.
Right.
I've always
used your expression.
Way of no, I don't think that's fair to say I use poetry for a particular purpose. But I've always written. As an undergraduate in Durham, I used to wander around in the wild woods. And then one time, not really thinking in pagan terms back then, of course, but then one time before I went back to college, I found my old school recorder underneath the bed. And I thought, I'm going to take that to college with me and play it. What I'm going to do, I said to myself, I'm going to go out in the wild. When I go out in the wild woods, I'm going to sit under a tree and play this. And I did. And it made me feel instantly happy, really, really happy. And I just thought, wow, this is something very, very good that I'm glad I found. Sitting under a tree in the woods playing the recorder is one of the great joys of life. And so then from there, the recorder's slightly out on its own sort of instrument. I moved to penny whistles And once I had mastered penny whistle fingerings, I was able to pick up quite a lot of different things like bamboo flutes and things like that and play with those. I started making borons in the late 80s.
Oh, okay.
As part of the kind of pagan shamanic culture thing that I was part of in South London.
Mm-hmm.
And then the most recent instrument are the English bagpipes. I go to the original reenactors market, which is this huge market. It's just outside Coventry. And some of your listeners will no doubt know it. I'm sure they do. Mm. But it's this huge market for historical reenactors. And I always go to it. And then I met Sean Jones, a bagpipe maker there, and he was a very nice fellow. And we'd have some good chat, and he'd give me a go on some of his instruments, I meet up, as a potential, as bagpipe curious. And then one time, he had this particular bagpipe. He said, "Yeah, try this. This is something I've just made. It's kind of interesting." And when I played it, I just got a feeling, I can feel the bagpipe calling to me now.
Yeah.
That was in 2008.
How's that?
And I'm still a beginner.
Yeah, yeah. And you say that's the English pipes you play. Is it a particular region of English pipe?
Well, okay, so bagpiping in England, what happened to it? A number of things happened to it. One thing that surely happened to it were Cromwell and the Puritans, mm-hmm. who didn't like music generally, and certainly didn't like to see uncouth peasants dancing around a bit drunk, having a great time. And the bagpipe was very much, prior to that period, the instrument of dance music rather than the fiddle.
Right.
But then when things kind of relaxed out of the kind of Commonwealth, and music and musicians and dancing and things like that started to make a comeback, for some reason, the fiddle very much ousted the bagpipe as the dance music instrument of choice, possibly because it's a more sophisticated instrument, and it can be tuned more precisely, and it can be played, loudly and softly and according to your needs, whereas an awful lot of rustic bagpipes can be quite difficult to tune precisely and are often quite loud. I currently have 4 sets of bagpipes. I started on something that Sean calls a shepherd's pipe, which is a very generic bagpipe. There are bagpipes like that all over Europe, and once was common in Britain. A little bit like what they call the Cumbrian or border pipe, only a mouth blown.
Right.
And then after that, I decided that I wanted something smaller and quieter, and I went back to Sean, and he makes a very nice. That you've seen me at Stedford's playing the small pipes. That's based on an 18th century German design. So strictly speaking, my small pipes are a German duty.
Okay.
And then recently I've acquired this thing I call the Beast, made by Julian Goodacre, which is a real old medieval English great pipe with big trumpety ends. It's loud. And that's a very dramatic instrument, but better for outdoors.
Yeah. Okay. Is it very loud? Is it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite loud. Yeah.
Okay.
And then also it's quite big, so it's very easy to just swing around and just, I don't know, hit the lampshade or whack somebody.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, and the bagpipe has been a bit of a journey because I never was someone who really read music and really sat down to learn specific tunes. And I never had much self-discipline, and I was just, I played for enjoyment and joined in with people when and where and how I could. But with the bagpipe, I've had to be more disciplined. So I play most days, make an effort to learn, to keep adding to my tune in order that I can go to some gigs. Some shows that I work at, as the wild man of the woods, the green man. Some shows I work at, I do a lot of voice spoken word stuff, but some shows I go to is more music. And so it's a very, I set myself the goal of being able to play for, a considerable amount of time without repeating myself.
Right.
That means knowing tunes.
Yeah.
And so I've been working quite hard. I work quite hard on that.
Yeah. So the English pipes that you've got, have they all got this is my interest. I've always wanted a set of pipes. Okay. I am more than bagpipe curious. I've spoken to Andy Letcher a couple of times about it. I've spoken to the lady, the woman in Dragon's Fly. I can't remember her name. Down in Glastonbury, she's another piper. And to be quite fair, Kerry has restricted me to say if you learn the pipes, you learn them up on the downs, and then when you can play them, you can come back home. But so I can kind of get a tune out of some the tin whistle and things like that. But what I've noticed is that some pipes have very different fingerings for different notes. The ones you play, are they the same as the tin whistle, or are they? See, that's what's confusing me. That's what gets me every time. Yeah, so they're different.
Well, first of all, Andy Letcher, what a great friend. Known him a long time. Not seen him as much since he moved to Devon, but when I first got into piping, Andy very, very graciously gave of me his time, and I went and he blessed me with a lot of really, really, really wise, useful, and practical advice.
Okay.
Which I still refer and about which I still remind myself. Basically, there are three different kinds of fingerings. If you play penny whistle, you take all your fingers off in sequence, and that's called open fingering. What I do is called semi-closed, and that is when, after I've taken all the fingers of my right hand off, I can't describe it. That's semi-closed. And then fully closed is when, like the Northumbrian small pipe, which is a bellows blown pipe, of course, but the Northumbrian small pipe, dear listener, I'm holding something up so Dave can see what I'm talking about.
Yeah, this is good podcasting. So he's holding up a pipe in front of him. Yeah. Yeah.
So the Northumbrian small pipe is fully closed, and so what happens then is you only take one finger off at a time.
Oh.
And
right.
Julian Goodacre, the bagpipe maker, once said to me, "Barry, it makes it sound more bagpipey."
Well, it's fair enough.
Which I said, I don't think my brain can handle another different set of fingerings. Now it's semi-closed.
Okay, right. So you take off
you kind of like you play the holes of one hand, and then you put that hand back on, and then you close those holes, and then you play the holes of the next hand.
Right. So, not too dissimilar then. So
not that hard to adapt, Dave. And there are these days in Britain, there are quite a lot of highly skilled people making simple, rustic English bagpipes.
Yeah.
Which won't break the bank or drive Kerry mad.
Both of which are very important.
Yeah. There are quite a few people doing it. So
yeah. You mentioned your Green Man performance, which you did at one of our Anderida camps. What can you describe that to the listeners, and what got you into that? Because it was absolutely magical to witness.
Well, the Wild Man of the Woods is okay. Well, I paint myself green, and I wear a large crown of ivy. Some of your listeners probably seen me, and I'm all in green. And I've been traveling up and down the country, doing various kinds of performances as the Wild Man of the Woods since 1991, which makes me, I reckon, the longest running and widest travelled green man. Possibly in history. And these days I mostly do public events. I used to do schools, museums, libraries, and more kind of formalized situations. But these days, I mostly do public events. And it started because I used to work in the Natural History Museum in London as one of those explainers who does workshops for visiting children and families. And they said everyone has to have a project for the summer holidays. And so I decided to do storytelling, and I did the story of a wood from the Ice Age to the present. Mm-hmm. And decided I'd create this wild character for it. And then the museum, the bosses said, "Oh, we like that. That's good. You can do that again." And then that winter, they held a huge conference. Do you remember the tree dressing day? Mm-hmm. We don't hear much about tree dressing day these days, but the charity Common Ground inaugurated National Tree Dressing Day. The Natural History Museum decided they were going to get involved in that, and they held a big national tree dressing conference. And then they decided they had to do it, and so then my green man got recruited to help out with that. And then that kind of was quite high profile, so that raised my profile. So then I started getting invitations to go to places. And by then I had already started performing a bit. Mm. Poetry, music, song, storytelling, and an informal kind of way within the kind of alternative culture of Southeast London.
Right.
So then I just started doing it. I've been a long time now. And basically, I make a point of not going for the lowest common denominator. The green man is an ancient pagan god of fertility. They carved thousands of these things on hundreds of Christian buildings for centuries because it was a secret. Mm-hmm. I always tell my audience it's a mystery.
Yeah.
They inherited it from classic temples where he was probably a temple guardian. And, I very much belong to the kind of Professor Hutton school of folklore studies, that most British folklore has a history. That history can actually be traced and understood. Most of it doesn't have direct pagan antecedents.
Yeah.
It's our folklore heritage is a precious, wonderful, and marvelous thing. But as Ronald always says, find out the truth of the matter is more interesting than just kind of having a whole load of beliefs about it that were to some degree invented by Edwardian romantics. There's a 13th century architectural document in which they're describing cathedrals in France. And then when one particular cathedral, it says, in this particular cathedral, there are lots of leafy men's heads.
Yeah.
So, so leafy men's head. But the thing is, though, modern paganism is what it is, right? It's an inspired, transformative, liberating tradition, which we are in the process of founding and creating. And modern pagans have taken our foliate heads and many other customs, and they have made them sacred. And I honestly think it's a wonderful thing that modern paganism, we take these materials and we have given them a sacredness they probably didn't have before. And I think that's very important and very special. So then when I'm being the green man, I can't kind of say, I don't say that I'm represent anything other than the land.
Yeah.
So then I say, I speak for the woods and the trees and the ponds and the pools and the rivers and the streams and the heaths and the moors and the rocky shores, and the blackbirds and thrushes and robins and wrens and the tits and the finches and woodpeckers and jays,
The voice of nature.
A voice of nature to contemporary British society. I'm not the only voice of nature to contemporary British society. There are many people doing inspiring things. But then to say that I speak for that, that's my aim. That's my ministry. My ministry isn't to actually try to persuade people to change their beliefs or to or to change their values necessarily, because I think it's actually, most people actually understand the state of the environment is a terrible thing. It's just that they're feeling disempowered and scared and uninspired about it. And that kind of, and that, that's a sad thing. And so, I always say that if they just see me sitting underneath my tree, the magic is working.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
feels to me like that is the healing that needs to be done because of the separation over the centuries that humans have built up in human constructs to separate ourselves from nature. It's like when you watch a David Attenborough program, you say you're watching a nature program. Not once does it show humans as part of nature. It's always something else. And I think the healing of your performances, the healing of, and it's almost like that spirit is calling out to people now to say, this is what we are, and the zeitgeist, if you like, or the thrust of modern paganism is something that is deeply needed. That connection to the seasons, to the animals, the birds, a reintroduction of some form of animism, of seeing other life forms as sacred and valid. To me, that's what the Green Man message is as well. Definitely.
Well, absolutely, very much so. And also in the figure of the Green Man, you have a really interesting thing because he can speak for nature, but it's history too. So then you have human history and, if you like, natural history can't be separated.
Yeah.
They can't be unwoven from one another. And that's the great illusion, that's the great illusion. And then if some young person in bright pink trainers says, "You're weird," I say, "Oh, no, young person. I'm not weird. I'm quite normal. You're weird." Out of the house and into the car, and out of the car and into the shops, and out of the shops where you can get anything you want anytime you want, and into the car and out of the car and into the school and out of the school and into the car and out of the car and into the house. Central heating, double glaze, and turn the tap, clean water. The roof doesn't even leak. The windows aren't even drafty. That you think that is normal. But I'm telling you that actually throughout history and throughout our world today, that is not normal. It isn't normal. There's a great story that I think it's King John is sitting in his bedroom writing in his diary to the light of a guttering candle, right? And he writes in his diary that his bedroom is really cold, and this is the king. His bedroom is cold and drafty, and oops, the draft blew his candle out. But then, the luxury and the freedoms and the comfort and convenience of our modern world is something we shouldn't take for granted. And in fact, what's happened as well is that while I've been doing this, I've become friends with quite a lot of bushcraft practitioners. I know that's something very dear to your heart, Dave.
Yeah.
And so I get a reasonable amount of work. I get some work every year. I get from bushcraft practitioners to come to their events. Last year I was at the big bushcraft show.
Brilliant.
This year I've got a booking, which is a bunch of teenagers doing bushcraft in the middle of a wooded estate in Oxfordshire. And while they're all sitting around the campfire after dinner one night, I'm going to emerge from the woods.
Brilliant.
Stay in them.
I've always said that, bushcraft to me completed the circle for me, for my connection to the natural world. I could go to a hawthorn. I could tell you all about the mythical stories to it. I can tell you about its folklore, but I couldn't tell you what it was used for. I couldn't tell you about how my relationship could be with it if I was living within the woods itself. And so, the fire by friction, the just shelter building, the water purification, the navigation through natural bits and pieces within the wood, to me, that completed the circle for me. It's like, you've got that spiritual connection, and it's built around also that very, very deep connection of being able to live there without, basically with a shoelace and a knife. That's pretty much all I need,
Yep.
Yeah.
That was also, that links with the art of conversation with the genius Loki, which is a very practical art. Because one of the things which struck me was that because of this pagan renaissance happening in the 90s, a whole load of pagans were starting to go out in the woods. And they can do harm to themselves.
Yeah.
Physically, mentally, spiritually, if they're not careful.
Mm.
And then there was one time I was at a camp many, many, many years ago, a pagan camp many, many years ago. And they said, well, Barry, we're going to do a sweat lodge tonight. And we looked if you could join in with us. I said, oh, that'd be great. It would be great to do a sweat lodge. Yeah. And they said, we want to build a bender for the sweat lodge, and we need to go out in the woods and cut some hazel poles. And I said, oh, great. Do you want me to come and help? And they said, well, actually, none of us know what hazel poles look like.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, guys, don't you worry. And I said, not only do I know what hazel poles look like, right, but I'll take you into those woods and I'll take you straight to a hazel tree with the right kind of poles in it. Fingers crossed behind back. But the local spirits did me proud. Yeah. And then, so we walked into the woods and I said, here you go. And they said, how did you do that? And I said, don't you know? Don't you know how I did that? Basically, and that's got one of the things that got me thinking. In fact, I have also been involved in a number of things now where, in fact, you support people to do something like that themselves. So someone comes into your woods and they need a particular thing, and you support them to find that for themselves. Mm. To find a particular species of tree, without kind of spending all day using a grid pattern of searching.
Yeah.
Because there's still very much a tendency, I think, among a lot of pagans to still be a little bit insulated from this stuff that, Dave, that you and I both celebrate. And I think that, more and more pagans should be heartily encouraged to get out and explore their local landscape. Mm. It's also easy to jump in the car and go to Avebury or Stonehenge or the Rollright Circle or Arbor or somewhere like that. And then, because that's special and that's powerful but there's a lot to be found. Absolutely. Simply by exploring sensitively, carefully.
Sometimes wonder whether or not that separation of the woods and nature to some degree comes from, when you look at the origins of paganism in the States, it seems to have come from protest, from the civil rights movement, from feminism and that kind of stuff. If you look at the roots of paganism in the UK, the very roots seem to have been very basically Victorian gentlemen in magical societies, practicing indoors in downstairs temples rather than outside in the woods. Do you know what I mean? Yep. And I think we're still trying to unpick ourselves a little bit from that, we're going to do an Imbolc ceremony and we're going to do it in the front room, rather than go into the woods and freeze ourselves stupid and connect with the cold and what is actually going on,
Well, agree 100%, Dave, with that. It still goes on.
Yeah.
You can't take your 4 coloured candles out in the woods if it's a bit windy.
Blow it out very quickly. Can I get back to yourself a little bit as well? Because I know you are an absolute avid. You love William Blake. I've heard your William Blake poem, and I think it brought Kerry to tears. I think she stood up and cheered you at the end of it all, because she's the same kind of passionate love of that man and his poetry and his art and everything about him, really. So how did you get into William Blake?
I saw a bit of Blake's art in a newspaper when I was a little kid. It was one of those pictures of Urizen with his dividers, A bearded old guy's got his dividers and I thought it was a bit scary. And my mum said, oh, that picture was by William Blake. He was a madman, right? Mm. And I thought, oh, really? But then, of course, you discover Jerusalem, the tiger. Think, not exactly mad. Although, in fact, both can be interpreted as being politically radical and revolutionary, if you want to read them that way. And then I suppose I always had a bit of an interest, and I tried to read Blake in a particular kind of way, in a linear kind of way, and to make sense of it. and to try to fit it in with my own perception of the world. And I never quite succeeded. And then one time at camp, I crawled out of a sweat lodge. It was a really hot one. 3rd round, led by Neil, the Druid formerly known as 8, who always used to stretch that 3rd round out. We were palpitating on the floor. Crawled out in this state of absolute relief and release. And somehow everything seemed incredibly intense. The sky, the clouds, the moon, the stars, the trees, the wind, the light, the sound, everything seemed, all my senses were really, 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 really ramped right up. And it was almost as if it was roaring. The roaring of the senses. Mm-hmm. And then I thought of Blake. And I went back and I thought, okay, how about instead of trying to understand Blake politically or theologically, what if Blake is actually practicing something very similar to what we do? And what he's actually trying to do is to put into words to describe the indescribable. And then, of course, we know very well that Blake wasn't just doing that. We know that he had very particular political and religious views. But after that, I sort of felt a bit of sympathy with him, and then I began to kind of look more closely at some of the things which have been written about him. And it's a bit sad. There are lots of Blake biographies, but many of them aren't really completely sympathetic. Even the ones that are sympathetic belong to what I call the poor Blake party. Poor Blake, he was a failure. He never succeeded. His great exhibition was a flop. Poor Blake, he never really had a very good head for business, etc., etc. Whereas there's one biography which I really, really like, and that is the one by Tobias Churton. Tobias Churton is famous for writing lots of books about the history of Gnosticism and also about the life and works of Aleister Crowley. Clearly, this person Churton is a practitioner of some kind, and his account of Blake is the closest to what I feel about him. And then I suppose you tune into these people. They become like inner guides or something like that. But Blake became a bit of a presence. Sometimes I just feel not that he was standing there lecturing me about something, or that he was hovering about doing some kind of weird magic thing, but rather that there was some kind of inspiration or some kind of encouragement, that there was a sense of encouragement that more than anything else, personally, what I was now receiving from Blake through his work or his presence was encouragement. And so I wrote the Blake poem, and then I did a very big Blake performance one time at the Winter Assembly, of course, when I learned Auguries of Innocence. And if you learn a big work like that off by heart, that in itself is a magical act and an invocation. And so after that experience, thanks to you guys on stage in Glastonbury Town Hall, Blake was really there for me. I think he was a prophet of our world. He was a man ahead of his time.
Yeah,
he was just a man completely ahead of his time. And you have to look through you have to see through what sounds like very orthodox religious language about Jesus and Christ and God and such like, to see what he's actually getting at about the nature of the human soul and the dynamism of inspiration and creativity, Yeah. Yeah, Blake, definitely very important to me. Yeah.
You wrote a poem about him, didn't you?
Yes, Blake's chest. Big Bill Blake.
Could you read it?
Strange as it may seem.
Aha.
I believe it's in here.
Lovely.
There he is, look, page 12. Blake's chest is filled by a wind roaring through time that does not heed convention or calamity. His mind knotted around a divine pressure behind his eyes, like a hangover or a coming beaver. Face frowning and laughing at the same time, and no one knows what thoughts are moving there. He doesn't care what may or may not be visible to his audience, only that they understand. His hands move suddenly and then they're still again. He can't remain motionless in this atmosphere's gloom. Head on fire, eyes burning, voice rising and falling in the song that he must sing. Everything alive within the horizon is stretching into the light, but we don't ever see. Some say he's crazy, but they see only danger and feelings set free into the wild of nature's embrace. It's the Garden of Eden every day, but no one wants that to be true right now. A rat race run by parasites, all too scared to wake up now and see the sun. The impossible is commonplace to them, and innocence and freedom are hopelessly overwhelmed by their serious intentions. If someone mentions the war in heaven, they nod so wisely as if they really understood. But there is no war, and no wall to contain the soul. Only a downcast gaze in the heat of the mind-made forge, where chains of belief and disbelief are equal in their power to condemn the human race to slavery. And a chain is a chain, whether it be forged from iron, lead, uranium, titanium, or gold. Mere words, you have been told, are not enough to show the unseen landscape of humanity's true heritage. No ghost, no machine, no animal red in tooth and claw, no root, no vine, no precious race. Only a heart beating light, a mind made transparent, unimagined, untrammeled, set free. The guilty globe of waking life, roaring with the primary pulsation of the senses, is burst open, like a soap bubble peeling itself apart from the point of penetration, setting free the reflections from its surface. And a red-haired man shouts and waves his arms about. He jumps up and down, pointing at a wildflower. He says, "The cistern contains, the fountain overflows. One thought builds immensity. What is now proved was once only imagined. Everything possible to be believed is an image of truth." And I say, we are enslaved by an idea that we have about ourselves, and we mock those who dare to question it.
Just fantastic. I mean, yeah, and that was the point where Kerry stood up and just cheered us.
That's a heart.
Yeah, your words are amazing, Barry. And I was looking through your website to sort of find some more of your work. And I listened to one that was read out by Steve, I think is both our friend, which was the one about the murmurations. And I think I've never heard you read that out, but that really got to me. That, you know, it was a beautiful thing. And it's the way that you... Do you use the awen as a term of what you latch into? Because to me, that's what it feels like. You know,
definitely.
Spiritual inspiration, poetic inspiration, and it seems to come from the very land and everything around you itself. And I know there are going to be people listening to this podcast right now who would just love to be able to open up to that stream. Have you got anything you could tell them of what they could do to help them make that connection and turn that feeling into words?
Or any other kind of creativity.
Or yes, exactly. Yes.
Okay. In ritual, we sing awen maybe 3 times, or maybe we do 9 cascading awens. But as you might remember, Dave, you know, I've very much been an advocate of awen as a practice. Sing awen, sing awen, sing awen for an hour, sing awen 100 times. You know, and in doing so, play with the sound of it, sing it melodically, chant it, sing it, allow the word and the energy of the word to work for you. And it's important, because I've done this practice a lot. It's an important, I would say possibly my most important practice within Druidry, apart from relating to the land and the elements and all the things we talked about. But I think the thing is to not have an agenda.
Yeah.
Sing awen. Sing prolonged awens without an agenda. Relax and let the magical sound do its work. That's one thing. Second thing is, when I talk to my poetry friends in Coventry, we often talk about writer's block.
Mm.
But my view is there's no such thing as writer's block. It just doesn't exist, right? There are various reasons why you sat down wanting to write and you didn't. There are various reasons why you need to create a piece of writing for a particular commission. I've got a commission right now from a thing called the Thrive Poetry, which is part of the Coventry Positive Images Festival, to write a poem about urban green space. And I haven't written anything yet, but I don't feel blocked because I think that somewhere, somehow, there's a sense of trust or faith that Owen is there. It's like getting your old-fashioned transistor radio and turning the little dial and hearing all kinds of funny noises and going up and down and trying to find the station you want, you know? It's a little bit like that. And your own mood and your location in space and in time, and your motivation, and your self-consciousness, all these things interface with this. Like in my life, it's weird, but in my life, one or two poems which did very well, like when you submit, they say you can submit up to 3 or 4 poems, you know? And I don't do that very much. I'm not a great one for submitting. It's a bit of a hamster wheel. But hey, once or twice when I've done that, sometimes the ones which did really well are actually the ones that I knocked off really quickly. You know, I'd written the main poem that I would put all the effort into. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And then, but I still had 1 or 2 spare ideas and a few nice words knocking around. And I don't write on lined paper anymore. I write in sketchbooks. Because I'm holding one up, folks. It's a sketchbook with scribble all over it.
Just free form.
Yeah, and less linear. You can do flow charts and you can, you know. So I had a few nice phrases and a few nice words left, and I knocked something off really quick with a few of the leftovers, and that's the one they like. It was less self-conscious.
Yeah.
You know. And then you never know when you're going to finally tune in, because you might do a ritual and say, right, I'm going to actually use all those things that I've been learning in order to invoke Owen, in order to get some inspiration, in order to stimulate my creativity for this particular project. I'm going to do a ritual. You do your ritual, but you don't necessarily going to get like some kind of instant vision or something from that. But that's cooking. That's in the cauldron now, isn't it?
Bubbling away.
There, isn't it? And then it might come at any time. So it's also really, really useful to have a small notebook you can keep in your pocket just in case.
Yeah.
And if I fall out of the habit, this is the current one, look, and there it is, you see, not in my pocket. If I fall out of the habit of having a small notebook in my pocket, I lose loads of stuff. And by the bed, I wake up in the middle of the night and sometimes an entire poem, rhythm, scanning, rhyming, allusion, metaphor, meaning, poem kind of unrolls in my mind while I'm lying in bed in the dark, and then I go back to sleep, and in the morning all I can remember was that there was a really good poem in the middle of the night at some point.
You always think that you're going to remember it, don't you? And you never do.
Either that, or you stagger up in the dark and you get your pen and you scribble in the dark.
Yes,
in the dark, and then the next morning it's virtually incomprehensible because you're writing in the dark.
Yeah.
And you think, what's that? Huh? I think though from a bit more, they're practical things, but from a magical perspective, there's the singing of the Arwen, and also there's going in search of Arwen. What is it which the where you are now in this moment in your life right now, where you are now in your particular pattern of living and being right now, what is going to inspire you? It might not be what inspired you last time. And then it becomes a little bit like a quest, a little bit of like a kind of search, or maybe an exploration, or a bunch of experiments. You know?
Yeah.
You go out and look for it. I remember that we visited the Tree Spirit Land, Macy Minnoch. A Tree Spirit's a tree planting charity with a strong pagan leaning from the 90s. And Anne and I returned to the land we planted with mixed deciduous trees in the 90s. After years, we hadn't been there for years and years and years. It was beautiful. But I was feeling really flat. I was not feeling inspired. I was feeling really flat. And so I went away from where everyone was working, and I went away from the group, and I wandered around the land, and I just asked them, you know? I just asked the land. I just said, what is it? What is it that, where is it that I should look, you know? And then I found myself in this place that I recognized visually from years before, where the edge of the land had a funny little opening in it and a gate, and then outside the gate there was this big old piece of stone set in the ground, and then quite literally, without my inviting anything whatsoever, quite literally, this stone looked at me and told me in one word what I was looking for. And I'm not to say that I hallucinated the stone spoke to me, but I knew the stone spoke to me. This word appeared. And thank you, old friend.
And you were off. Yeah, and it worked. I
don't think that you see. I think that sometimes we make it hard for ourselves, don't we?
Yeah. And the harder I try, the less I manage when it comes to creativity. And it's almost an act of surrender to me.
Yeah,
it's stepping into the flow and just letting it happen rather than forcing it.
Something that you write some great songs, Dave. So clearly, your insight into this process is clearly a very important contribution. You know.
Thank you, mate. Well, my friend, we've been talking for nearly an hour.
Yes.
People can find out more about Barry at redsandstonehill.net. That's still your website, yeah? And I noticed that there's some of your books still available to buy on the website.
Yep, there are some of my pamphlets are still available. Yep.
Well, I love your work, and you're an awesome mate. So there we are. Thank you, Barry, for spending this time with me. I will see you at the summer gathering, I really hope, if not that, the winter gathering. And thanks for spending some time with me on DruidCast.
Thank you very much, Dave. Thanks for having me.
In search of murmuration, winter fever of the starling nation, the shade shadow flutter, the crepuscular corpuscle. We follow the marsh-like luck track then, further into the feathered fen, sight lines to familiar woods, lost in time and dim distances. Lost in winter's silences and sore rasp of the leaf-edge hiss, the wind writes cursive script upon the pool, where the hooded heron is stalking eels. The mass of voice wave rushes over, a softly roaring dark frost flower, 1,000 eye wings in the wave, knitting threads of many voices. Nested parabolas of flight, flutter vector star-winged light, the wild host, the number storm, whiplash accumulation of life force. You feel their presence as they turn, and gloaming skies begin to fade. As winter's ravage sun descends, so do the birds into the reed refuge. Someday we will be dead and gone, but let us pray that this will go on. The great gathering of the starling swirl, the murmur, the murmuration.
I absolutely love talking to Barry, and like I say, we've known each other for years, but whenever we were in the same place, I was always running around organising stuff, so we'd never had the opportunity to just sit down and chat before, so that was great. After the interview, you heard a recording of Barry Patterson's poem Murmurations that was read by Steve King. But this music means we are approaching the end of the show, but before I go, let's have the results of last month's competition. The prize was a copy of Lavanna Morgan's new book, A Sea Witch's Companion, and the question I asked was, what is the name of the goddess from the Mabinogion who was Lavanna's first spiritual connection to the sea and who has stayed with her throughout her journey? Well, the answer is Arianrod, and the first name drawn from the hat and winner of that book is Sarah Richardson from Canada. Congratulations, Sarah. That book will be with you as soon as the International Post allows. The prize this month is a copy of Barry's book, Land Mandala, and the question I'd like you to answer is, one of Barry's great influences is a famous English poet and artist. What is that poet artist's name? One of Barry's great influences is a famous English poet and artist. What is that poet artist's name? Email your answer along with your full postal address to podcast@druidry.org, and one of you will win a copy of that poetry book. Well, my friends, that is a show. I will see you next month for episode 190. But until then, I wish you all, as ever, peace and blessed be. Goodbye.